Bullshit.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm Dave Mastovich, CEO and founder of Massolutions, the world's only no bullshit marketing firm. Today, we have an episode of the Sights and Sounds of Marketing. And what does that mean? I take a song, a movie, a show, something from pop culture, and I break down how that ties to messaging, storytelling, leadership, and communication. Then I take a look at the year of that show, movie, song, and I see what else was happening when it comes to messaging, storytelling, and big ideas from that year. Today's episode is about one of the all-time movies for catchphrases. Because if a movie has one major catchphrase or anecdote that people talk about in the workplace and they talk about for years later, or you can say the phrase and it's memorable, one is pretty significant. Not many movies get that. To get two is kind of amazing. Three. But Jerry Maguire didn't have one, didn't have two, didn't have three, didn't have four. They had about 5 major messaging pieces in the movie that were so memorable that people that weren't even born the year that Jerry Maguire came out know some of these catchphrases. They might not even know it's from Jerry Maguire. So we're going to take a look at the sights and sounds of marketing for 1996, starting off with the movie Jerry Maguire. If you're not familiar with the movie Jerry Maguire, it's about a sports agent who was the stud sports agent in that he was the top tier sports agent who had the best athletes and he had the reputation. And he was at a large sports agency. And it's based on Lee Steinberg, a hugely successful agent. And Tom Cruise is playing this sports agent who also has this beautiful girlfriend who works at the agency. He's got all kinds of support staff who look up to him, and he's known for taking you to a restaurant to have the meeting when you get fired. And I can relate to that because one place that I worked at had a restaurant in the building that was a pretty good restaurant, and I subconsciously did the same thing. I would take and have a lot of my major meetings there. And so unfortunately, there were some great meetings there, but there were also some of the tough meetings there. So when a staffer knew they had to meet me at that restaurant, they were always wondering, am I going to get fired? Well, that's one piece of it, is that Jerry Maguire would take people to this restaurant when he was telling them that they had to get on with their life's work. Well, what ended up happening was Jerry Maguire was the typical agent who was all about the money. And he had an epiphany one night when he was at a conference. So there's people from his team and people from the other other agencies at this conference. And he decides that he is going to write this thesis, this big idea, this theme, this manifesto about how agents should care more about the athletes and less about the money. He writes this and he stuffs it into people's inboxes because there was actually places where you stuffed it, and it was an old style where you'd actually get pen and paper because it's 1996 when the internet is just kind of starting. And he also does email it and he sends it out. And after he gets it, he comes into the conference the next day and he gets a standing ovation. Everyone's clapping for him because what he wrote is great and we all believe it. Now, just a little sidebar, I kind of lived this stuff throughout my corporate career where I did this, what Jerry did, and it's a tough thing because when you're talking about something that is the ideal that you see, not that you're always right, but it's just how you see the ideal of your profession. When you talk about that in corporate America, it's tough, and people maybe clap in front of you, but behind your back, they're talking shit on you. So I can relate to Jerry Maguire because the no bullshit marketing mantra, I use that when I worked for multi-billion-dollar companies. And guess what? It wasn't really well received. Maybe to my face it was well received, but behind my back, I was shot at from the grassy knoll, as I like to say. So Jerry has the same thing happen. He comes down, and he's at the conference, and he gets a standing ovation. When they get back to home, to where he works, one of his people that he's mentored says, hey, can we have lunch? And they go and they have lunch where Jerry does the firing, at the table that Jerry does it. So he gets fired by his mentor. So doing the ideal thing or trying to do the right thing and writing this manifesto was not thought of highly. So I tell you this because this is part of the story, and stories are what we remember, and stories are what we relate to. And this story is something that I can relate to, and it's significant for you, a no BSer, because the no BS mantra wasn't well received throughout my career. The idea of being vulnerable wasn't well received throughout my career. I was once criticized because I brought up my directors when I was at the senior level cabinet meeting or the VP meeting. I would bring up my directors and my team. And I was actually pulled aside and said, why do you do that? Being vulnerable and admitting a weakness, saying I could have done better on that, wasn't well received. The whole no BS mantra, creative art driven by behavioral science, wasn't well received. People said I was outside of my box. Well, you don't handle that. Well, I'm just giving you an idea and you're a peer, but instead it was seen as a threat. So I can relate to what Jerry went through. That's why this is important to you, is that what you believe in and the ideas that you have and the passion that you have is not going to be well received by the majority of people. To your face, maybe, but behind your back, no. And that's what happened to Jerry. Standing ovation when he comes down to the conference for agents from people in his company and other companies. Gets back to the office. His mentoree says, can we go to lunch? He fires him. Jerry comes back, and the famous scene is he takes the goldfish, because they had the aquarium there at the agency, and he takes the goldfish and says, I'm taking the name of the goldfish with me. And he says, who's coming with me? And there's hundreds of people in a cube farm. You've all seen a cube farm, right? A cube farm is cube after cube after cube of employee. They're all listening to him, and they're feeling uncomfortable for him because they don't have the courage to say that they're going to go with him, and probably rightfully so, because they have no idea exactly what he's doing, and they have a good job. One person gets up and she says that she will go with him. And that's how the movie starts, because then it's going to eventually turn into those two end up having part of the love story. But Jerry then needs to try to get his clients. And so immediately when he got fired, before the goldfish scene, he runs back to the office, gets on the phone. The guy that fired him already has his speed dial ready, and he's calling who he thinks Jerry's going to call. Now, I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen whenever someone's let go. You try to call who you think they're going to call. Jerry can't reach any of his agents, any of his athletes. He even has the supposed number one pick quarterback, the equivalent of Peyton Manning or Baker Mayfield or Kyler Murray or whomever, who's going to be the number one pick. And he only can reach a wide receiver who is not even the streaky number one wide receiver. He's kind of a possession receiver, so that's not as valuable in monetary terms. And that is played by Cuba Gooding Jr., and his name's Rod Tidwell in the movie. He reaches Cuba Gooding Jr., and we get the first catchphrase that is part of storytelling. And why it's part of the sights and sounds of marketing is because when you leverage the power of storytelling, you make an emotional impact that is memorable. And that scene was when Jerry's on the phone with Rod Tidwell, and Rod Tidwell says, Jerry, I need you to show me the money, and I need you to show that you want my business. You want me to stay with you instead of with your company you just got fired from. And he says, the first catchphrase comes out, and he says that, I need you to tell me that. And Jerry goes, what do you mean? He says, tell me that you mean it. Show me the money. And he goes, show me the money. And Rod Tidwell goes, Jerry, no way. That's not enough. Show me that you mean it. And Jerry says, no, remember, Jerry's still in his office where he's got fired. He's trying to do this before they bring security to escort him out. So he doesn't want to be embarrassed. So he looks around and goes, show me the money. He goes, that's not enough, Jerry. Come on, show me you mean it. He goes, show me the money. And now people start to turn and look at Jerry, and he goes, show me the money. Show me the money. And he's screaming, and everybody in the cube farm is looking at this guy screaming, show me the money, who just got fired, and they're assuming he's had a nervous breakdown. Finally, Rod Tidwell says, you get to keep me as a client. However, he kept Jerry so long on the phone to close this low-level sports star, not a big-tier sports star, So now he can't get on the phone with the big money guys, the people who are the quarterbacks, the top tier receivers, the best defensive player. He hangs up with Rod Tidwell, tries to call the other ones, and they're already hanging up on him because they've already been called by the other guy who says, Jerry's crazy. Jerry, you don't want to be with Jerry. So that's when he leaves the room and goes out and does the aquarium scene. But the phrase, show me the money, became a catchphrase. And in 1997, 1998, 1999, you would hear that a lot when somebody was telling a salesperson that they better kick ass for them. And they would say, show me the money. Or when somebody was challenging somebody to be clutch, show me the money. So much so that even someone that was born in 1996 has heard of the story of Show Me the Money. So that's important to you as a listener, because when the movie was made, the Show Me the Money scene was just a small piece of it. They didn't expect it to become a catchphrase. It's not that significant to the movie. But that's the key, is stories make an emotional impact. And stories are relatable, and stories are about people. And it has all three of those. It makes an emotional impact because you're feeling for Jerry. You're sitting there saying, this guy just got shit on. And this guy's kind of shitting on him, and he doesn't have any choice. He has to try to ride this out and close this guy and then try to get on to the next. It's relatable because whether you've been fired or not is not the point. Because here's what I would tell you. If you're talented and you're pushing to achieve great things, one of two things will happen to you. You will either get forced out. I should say it's one of three things. You either get forced out, so you left on your own but you were told to go, or you get fired, or you get bored and frustrated and leave for that reason. That's if you're talented, if you're creative, if you're producing, and if you're pushing positive change. That's not everyone. In fact, that's not 60 to 70% of the people in the workplace, maybe higher. So the 20 or 30% of the people in the workplace that are creative, highly productive, talented, in a top tier, and pushing positive change will all go through one of those three things. So if you haven't yet, and you're 27, it's going to happen. If you haven't yet and it's 57, it's going to happen. If you're 57 and it hasn't happened yet, you've had a ton of luck. So three things will happen. One of three things. You will either get frustrated and move on your own. You will be getting signals that it's time for you to move on, and you'll move on your own, or you'll get whacked. So that's why this is relatable, because the talented people that watch this movie immediately went, holy shit, I've been there. So now you've got relatability. People that maybe have never been there are thinking, holy shit, if that would happen to me, what would I do? So it's relatable. And the third thing is it's about people. Because while Rod Tidwell played excellent by Cuba Gooding Jr., he won the Best Supporting Actor Grammy. So he was so good at playing that you could relate to him, because you're like, he's kind of being a jerk, but he's also wants to make sure this guy's going to do everything he can for him. And then Jerry you're relating to because you just feel so bad. So it's about people. And those are the three major elements of stories. So the Show Me the Money anecdote is the first of multiple memorable stories that came from Jerry Maguire and spawned this episode of the Sights and Sounds of Marketing as part of the No BS Marketing Show. The movie continues to go on, and what happens is Jerry is trying to help Rod, and Rod continues to consume all of Jerry's time. And Renee Zellweger is the woman that that left the agency to work for him, so he's practically working out of her house, and the two of them are spending all their time on trying to get Rod Tidwell more money. And Rod keeps acting like a jerk, and that's why Rod isn't getting money. So he's playing the stereotypical athlete who thinks only about himself and is a jerk, and as a result isn't well liked, so they can't get the endorsements, they can't get the extra money. So Jerry, in the beginning, tries to play like we all do. You say, like, what's the best way I can get through to someone on my team as the leader? And so you try to do it in a way that's memorable, in a way that's creative, but in a way that's not pushy, in a way that won't be seen as you're telling him right out, you're being a jackass, Rod, not that. So we do this as leaders. We go through these steps. I do it all the time with my team. As you start off with almost just casually saying something, hoping the person picks up on it. Then you get a little more distinct, and you say, you know what, in this instance, you might want to try that. And the third one, you maybe get a little more firm. And then by the fourth time, you're kind of like, you have to change this behavior next week. So you don't want to just jump to, you have to change this behavior next week because the person might have been having a bad day. They might have only done it twice, whatever. He starts off by saying, Rod, they're in the bathroom and Rod's standing there with just a towel on, maybe even naked. I can't even remember, just a towel on, I think. And Tom Cruise's Jerry Maguire is talking to him. He's trying to convey that you're a jerk. And he says, Rod, I need you to help me help you. And Rod Tidwell, Cuba Gooding Jr. goes, help me help you. Rod Tidwell smirks and he goes, help me help you. Help me help you. And Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise is in the Tom Cruise mode of this, and Tidwell just laughs in his face. So imagine you're this agent who a week or two ago was one of the most powerful agents in the world, on top of the world, and now you got this possession receiver, not a superstar, basically laughing at you when you're doing your best. So then help me help you became a memorable anecdote that anyone that saw the movie, and even many that didn't, could relate to, because you would see the clip of it, and it was just, you're this person that's trying so hard, and this person has a little bit of leverage on you, and so you're trying so hard to maintain your dignity and get this person to do what's in their best interests, and they just laugh at you. Anyone that's been in sales has lived that. Probably anyone that's been in leadership has lived that. Anyone that has played sports has lived that, where someone just kind of shit on you when you were doing your best to try to help them. And it just conveyed ego and sports mindset and vulnerability, because Jerry was being vulnerable. So the story, the second major message, that when you tell that story or you show that clip, people are laughing and they go right back to seeing the movie in 1997, because it came out in December of 1996. And it's help me help you. Now, the movie ends up where Rod turns it around and becomes the hardest playing guy he ever was, and on Monday Night Football has the greatest game, and it gets the big contract. So Jerry wants to celebrate so bad. He wants to run home and be with his girlfriend, and he comes in and he starts to make this speech, and he makes this amazing speech to her in front of all of her friends. And in the midst of that, he's explaining how he felt empty when this happened, and he ends it with, you complete me. And all the friends of her start crying because he's saying, you complete me. So the you complete me becomes a phrase. But the more significant phrase was Renee Zellweger's line when she says, he finally stops and she goes, you had me at hello. And that became the line for whenever somebody was about to make a big presentation, they're in the middle of the presentation, you stop because you're going to buy it. You had me at hello. Or when somebody's talking to you about something important in your life and it's your significant other, whatever, you had me at hello. So anyone from that era remembers you had me at hello, and they remember that scene from Jerry Maguire that started with you complete me. So both of those phrases became part of the vernacular in 1997. So it was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. Cuba Gooding Jr. won for Best Supporting Actor. That all ties into messaging, because each of these are phrases that are so memorable. I've used each of these in clips in presentations that I made. Recently, I just did one with the help me help you to a group that I was trying to show them that I was there to help them, but the only way that I could was if they opened up and were willing to be open to new ideas. As soon as I put the clip on, everyone starts laughing. It also highlighted an industry that was shady. And why is this significant? The industry has improved over the past few decades, but part of the reason for that improvement was there was a spike in college enrollment for people wanting to go into sports marketing and becoming agents. And so you saw an influx of agents that came aboard during that time. So it's the sights and sounds of marketing, starting with Jerry Maguire, which was released in December of 1996 as a Christmas movie, became big in 1997. So what else was going on when it comes to the sights and sounds of marketing in around that time, mid to late 1996 into 1997? Well, here's some of that. In 1996, the middle of 1996, Fox News made its debut, and that changed the political discussion, because prior to Fox News, most of your news was from ABC, CBS, and NBC from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then cable started getting bigger in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And then CNN was there. Well, each of those networks had a liberal bias. I don't think anyone would argue that there was some level of a liberal bias. Now, liberals will say it was a small liberal bias. Conservatives will say it was a gigantic liberal bias, but there was a liberal bias. So as soon as Fox comes out, they would like to say they have a conservative bias, but they actually went more towards almost completely being a conservative channel with entertainment type things coming off as if it were news. So that changed the whole political dynamic, in my opinion. This is all opinion. In my opinion, that changed the political dynamic because then MSNBC and CNN, they had to counter that to get ratings. So you have, in the last 20 years, you've seen shows that are really entertainment shows almost sort of pitched like they're a news show and sort of pitched like they aren't opinion, that they're fact. And that's on both sides of the aisle. So what this has done, in my opinion, has led to more and more discourse and more people only listening to what they already believe. And I think prior to Fox, while there was a liberal bias, you probably had a third of the people were not necessarily locked in to what they were going to do, and you had maybe a third that were pretty passionate on one side and a third on the other side. That has gone up to probably 40%, 45% on each side, and only 10 to 15, maybe at the most 20% that are listening and gathering information. In the world of sports, the New York Yankees won the World Series for the first time in 18 years. Now, they have the most World Series wins all time, and they're in a huge media market. They started another dynasty in 1996. That's a big story from a storytelling standpoint. You're in a major market, possibly one of the most important markets in the world, a big market, and you are this team that's legendary, and you get back to winning a World Series for the first time in 18 years. That's part of storytelling. So that should be part of the sights and sounds of marketing. While we stick with sports, we recently had a podcast about The Last Dance. The Last Dance, a show about the Bulls of the 90s, a dynasty that won 6 of 8 titles, the 2 titles when Michael Jordan was retired. They didn't win. And it was all about these cast of characters: Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, the owners, the 2 Jerrys, Reinsdorf, and so forth, and Krause. So the Bulls were in the midst of their second three-peat. So at this time, they were about to go through that second three-peat when they were winning those titles. So that's a part of storytelling. Why is that significant? Well, the Bulls, as you can see by The Last Dance being so compelling to people of all ages, were just one of those rare types of teams. And interestingly, 2 of the more notable ones in all of sports are both from Chicago, the Chicago Bulls and the Chicago Bears of the mid-'80s. The Bulls were much more successful in a true dynasty. The Bears won 1 title and should have won more. But it's because they have people, the cast of characters. Remember I said stories have to be relatable. They have to make an emotional impact, and they have to be about people. And that's what makes these teams different. The New York Mets of the 80s, the Chicago Bears of the 80s, the Bulls of the 90s, the Warriors of this last decade, the Heat, as from an NBA standpoint. But you get these teams, the Dallas Cowboys of the 90s. They're great, but they also have the cast of characters. And that's what the Bulls had, and they were in the midst of that second three-peat. Sights and Sounds of Marketing, 1996 and 1997. There were 100,000 websites in 1996. I've written and spoke about how at that time, websites were optional. There were 100,000 websites in 1996. Now there are more than 1 billion. Websites were actually optional because the internet, even though people like to say the internet was 93, 94, the reality is you weren't seeing the masses on the internet in 95 and even into 96. There wasn't as much of the purchases. There were people who were afraid to buy on the internet. There was a lot of fear, and that's why PayPal, which led to Elon Musk becoming what he is, because we were afraid to buy on the internet. There were only 100,000 sites in 1996. So when people tell you that the early 90s was the internet started 20 years before that. It then hit again in 92, 93, 94. You started seeing glimpses of it. But the mainstream use in 96, there were only 100,000 websites. So how could it possibly have been this mainstream use? It started 96, 97, 98 was when the internet started really growing. That's an important thing from a technology standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint. The internet has changed everything from a storytelling standpoint. Another thing is, I mentioned Elon Musk, and he has Tesla. And Tesla's had these record-breaking years. If you invested in Tesla 2 years ago, a year ago, and you stuck with it, you made a ton of money. That's because his electric cars are getting better and better, and they're making more and more of an impact. So we're now seeing this, and we're saying the electric car is still barely scratching the surface. You see a Tesla, you actually look, because they're not a dime a dozen. They're not 1 out of 10 cars. If 10 cars go by, you don't see a Tesla. And that's today, 2021. The first electric car was produced by General Motors in 1996. It was called the General Motors EV1. Think about that, how long it's taken. And that is partly because of storytelling. It's because of communication. It's because of marketing. We have not been able to buy into this yet, the electric cars. And I'm, again, not defending them. I'm not saying I love them, hate them. I'm saying it's a messaging thing. Most people still aren't comfortable with buying them for whatever reason. Maybe they think that they're more expensive. And maybe they are, but I think if you study that, it's probably not the case because of not using gas. Maybe people love the current style car instead of the electric car. Whatever, that's a messaging thing. It's a storytelling thing. Another major one was that Apple bought Next, which was Steve Jobs' company. And that was the first step towards bringing Steve Jobs back to drive Apple and change the world with all the things that he did when he came back to Apple. So Apple bought Next. That brings Steve Jobs. You want to talk about storytelling. You want to talk about impacting how stories are told. First of all, iTunes changed how we listen to music. Albums used to be listened to. People felt they had to only be one genre. You were weird if you were like me when I was a DJ, and I loved alternative music, but I loved alternative music that was danceable. I loved rock, and I loved rap, which was what was hip-hop before hip-hop. And so I'm out there playing all this stuff, and I was seen as an oddball because prior to iTunes and the internet, you were kind of told you were supposed to like one genre. Now you can build a playlist and you don't even realize that you went from pop to rock to hip-hop to pop to country. That didn't happen until iTunes. That's all because of Steve Jobs. And then, of course, the iPhone, the iPad, everything. So the genesis of that was when Apple bought Next and Steve Jobs came back. We're talking about the sights and sounds of marketing. This episode started by talking about Jerry Maguire and how legendary the messages and the stories from Jerry Maguire led to catchphrases. But then we started digging into the other things that happened around that time, mid-1996 to mid-1997. The Packers beat the Patriots in January of 1997 in the Super Bowl. Yes, the Patriots had not yet won a Super Bowl. They were 0-2 after that one. They were 0-2, and they were led by Drew Bledsoe, who would lose his job to some late-round draft pick by the name of Tom Brady. The Packers were led by Brett Favre. The Macarena became a worldwide hit and dance, which was a great thing. As a DJ, I had to play that and watch people do that dance. The Dow topped 6,000 for the first time. 6,000! Just think about 6,000. And here are some of the top ads. Pepsi had a Super Bowl ad where a Coke truck driver and a Pepsi truck driver talking, and the Coke truck driver tries to sneak a Pepsi and all the cans fall out of the refrigeration area and it becomes a scene. And that was a memorable ad during the Cola Wars. Budweiser reprised their frog ad that was so successful the year before, and in the Super Bowl they had them outside in the freezing winter, Budweiser, because they were frozen, so that made the way to bring that back. And then Tiger Woods had his first Nike ad, and the Tiger phenomenon began from a messaging standpoint, an advertising standpoint, a star standpoint, a celebrity standpoint. The sights and sounds of marketing tied to Jerry Maguire in mid-1996 through mid-1997. What were the top television shows? What were the top storytelling vehicles through TV back then? NBC TV had their must-see TV, which had the top 6 shows. The top 6 shows were on NBC and most on the same night. ER, was number 1. Seinfeld, number 2. Friends, number 3. Suddenly Susan, number 4. The Naked Truth, number 5. And Fired Up, number 6. So 4, 5, and 6, Suddenly Susan, The Naked Truth, and Fired Up, they were not great shows necessarily, but it shows you how you can ride the coattails about how you present content. And back then, when you presented content, you would get a benefit from being on before or after a great show. Whereas now we just watch what we want to watch when we want to watch it on Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever. Back then you couldn't do that. So NBC's Must-See TV had these 3 great shows, ER, Seinfeld, and Friends, and they packaged other shows around them that ended up coming in 4, 5, and 6, Suddenly Susan, The Naked Truth, and Fired Up. So why do I tell you that as part of the Sights and Sounds of Marketing? Because this show, the No Bullshit Marketing Show, is about leadership, communication, and storytelling. And if you look at it, you have to present your audience through the channel that works. And back then, you had much more control as a network. We didn't have the freedom and flexibility because the internet wasn't there yet. So they knew that NBC could package something like Suddenly Susan and have it maybe right after Friends, and it becomes a top 10 show. So when you're doing your storytelling, you have to leverage the channel that fits up with the target audience that you want to reach and maximize that channel. And today that channel might be in a certain form that it won't be a year from now. You certainly don't benefit from stacking shows like you did in 1996 and 1997. So there you go. The Sights and Sounds of Marketing as part of the No BS Marketing Show. This one is tied to the movie Jerry Maguire because it had so many memorable catchphrases, anecdotes, and stories to carry through decades later. But it also carries through what happened in late 1996 and 1997 related to storytelling, slogans, catchphrases, messaging, leadership, and communication. Thanks for listening to this episode of the No BS Marketing Show, recorded in our own studios, The Lair, in bold, beautiful downtown Pittsburgh. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.